Hello, today we're going to be talking about 10 practical but honest tips on how to lose fat or perhaps troubleshooting why you aren't losing body fat. Number one, exercise does not burn as many calories as we think it does. So if you go and you work out for the day and you do a 45-minute strength training session, you are probably not going to be burning hundreds and hundreds of calories to warrant making up for those calories through food. Getting out of that mind space of you have to work out to earn your food is going to be extremely beneficial, because not only is this really difficult to regulate and to track, it also is going to lead to a lot of inaccuracies, since typically any type of fitness tracker is going to have a wide range of inaccuracy. The good news is these inaccuracies tend to be pretty consistent depending on whatever device you're using, but it is not something that you really need to put much consideration in. Number two, probably one of the biggest ones that I've seen as a coach, is sleep. Getting enough of it and getting good quality of it. There's a study that had half the participants in bed for 8.5 hours. On average, they ended up sleeping for 7.5 hours, give or take a few minutes, and the other half of the participants were in bed for 5.5 hours, and that group only slept for a little bit over 5 hours per night on average. Both groups lost about 6.6 pounds throughout the duration of the study. However, the group that slept more lost 50-50 to fat loss and muscle. The interesting thing is the group that actually slept less lost 20-80 to fat loss and muscle mass. So for the group that slept less, only 1/5 of the weight that they lost was actually from body fat. Obviously, when the goal is dieting, we want to maintain as much muscle as possible, since muscle is often what gives us the lean look that we're striving for. If you don't have enough muscle, this is where you can get into the skinny fat territory. Usually that's not the goal for people, but who am I to yuck anyone's yum? Not to mention, for the group that slept less, hunger was also higher due to an increase in ghrelin, which is basically the hunger hormone signaling that you need to go and eat more. Number three, if you aren't weighing your food, you are leaving a lot of data on the table. You don't actually know how many macros and or calories you're consuming if you aren't weighing and tracking your food consistently. Maybe counting macros isn't for you, and that's perfectly fine. It's not for everyone, especially those who have struggled with eating disorders in the past. It may not be a viable option, but for many people, it is something that will bring a lot of awareness and education to nutritional habits and teach you a lot about what your food provides for you. One of the biggest things I hear from clients after tracking consistently is that they're astonished by the macro breakdown and the calories within foods that they thought were actually going to be pretty low calorie or high volume for them. The fact is, you can't say you're in a caloric deficit if you don't actually accurately know how many calories you're consuming throughout the day. Number four is putting too much emphasis on what the scale is telling you. Raise your hand if you've ever stepped on the scale when you're in a caloric deficit and you notice that it hasn't moved in a while or has even gone up slightly, and it's completely discouraged you from continuing to push through the deficit. Your immediate response may be, this isn't working, something's not right, no matter what I do, I'm not getting to the goals that I want to get to. And this could encourage you to then swing in the opposite direction, kind of abandon ship and start reverting back to old habits. Weight loss isn't going to be linear, and it isn't always going to be represented on the scale in the first place, because you could be losing fat underneath the surface, but you could also be having water retention due to high levels of stress, since dieting inherently is stressful. Especially if you have other factors in your life that are increasing your cortisol or your stress response, then it's going to be making it even more challenging to determine whether or not that scale is an accurate representation of what's going on physiologically. This is why sticking to a program long term, and especially hiring a coach to look over your progress, is going to be key to your progress, because just when you could be hitting a new slump in your weight, you could have actually abandoned if you were doing things on your own, or just weren't being mindful that these fluctuations will happen. I've seen clients be steady at the same weight for weeks, if not months on end, and then all of a sudden it drops. Even during that time where their weight is steady, they look different in their progress photos, which is why progress photos can also be useful. Highly palatable foods is number five. So the reason why highly palatable foods are tricky is because obviously they taste good and we want to eat a lot of them. So if you have cookies in the house, for example, and you're craving cookies, it's going to be really easy to access the cookies and eat them. And even more so if you have a hard time with moderation and perhaps not eating out of packaging, things like that. Now, if I want cookies, but I don't have cookies in my house, and I either have to drive to the grocery store to buy up cookies, or I have to DoorDash or Instacart them and pay $30 for a package of cookies that should have only been $5, I am far less likely to do so. Therefore, I'm less likely to have any cookies. This isn't to say that these kinds of foods are bad. It just means that they are really, really enticing and it's really easy to consume a lot of them because they do taste so good. So it may be in your best interest to not keep certain foods in the house during a dieting period. This is also handy when looking at eating out, because if you go to a pizza place, it's going to be really easy to consume multiple slices of pizza, whereas if you go somewhere that has a wide variety of different options, you may be able to select a meal that makes more sense for your dieting goals. Number 6 is one of the biggest things that I have seen help people as a coach, and that is increasing your fiber intake and increasing your protein intake. Now, most people who are into fitness understand that protein is key, but it's not only hitting the macros. It also depends on where you're getting your protein sources from. So if I'm focusing on a lot of lean protein sources, specifically animal sources, because they are going to be the closest to a pure protein source, I'm going to feel more satiated throughout the day. If I'm relying on a lot of whey protein products to help me get my protein, such as bars to shakes to whatever, then that's going to make it trickier because that is digested quicker and it's not going to keep me full for very long. Now on the flip side, something like casein protein is actually going to be beneficial for some people because it is digested extremely slowly. It's also really thick, so you have to drink a lot of liquid with it in order for it to be palatable, but that can keep you full for a really long time. So if protein shakes are something that you need within your diet and you're struggling with hunger, that can be a really useful tool. For fiber, you have things like whole grains, some veggies, some fruits, some things like seeds, like flaxseed, chia seed, and you can even supplement with something like Metamucil. For example, if I'm going to have a meal that I know is low in fiber, what I can do is I can just toss 2 teaspoons of Metamucil in some water, shake it up, chug it down, and then have my meal. By starting my meal off with that, I am more likely to be full sooner throughout my meal and less likely to overconsume, even if it's a highly palatable food. Typically with clients, I see people getting at most 12 grams of fiber a day on average. Ideally, most people want to be in the 25 to 30 gram range. However, you can have higher than 30 grams, just depending on how your body handles it. If you notice that it starts to make things not feel good, then obviously you might want to scale back. However, fiber tends to get a bad rep with people because they often increase their intake too quickly or they aren't consistent with it. So if you are going from consistently having low fiber days to then having a really high fiber day, you may experience some gastrointestinal upset. So when you are focusing on increasing fiber, take it gradually and slowly and allow your body to acclimate. Number 7 is hunger is normal. And I don't mean this in the sense that you have to be starving every day, all day in order to lose weight. That's not the case. But if it's been a few hours since your last meal and you're experiencing hunger and you have maybe an hour or two until your next meal, it's probably not going to be the worst thing in the world to just deal with it for the time being and wait until your next meal and eat. The problem that a lot of people end up facing is they start to go into panic mode as soon as they experience hunger, thinking that they need to immediately eat. And the fact is, in a caloric deficit, when the goal is fat loss, you're going to experience hunger. It's going to be a part of it. Dieting is hard and it's not the most enjoyable experience, but this is where it comes down to your own goals and what you're willing to go through in order to reach them. As much as we try to find the best of both worlds when it comes to dieting and enjoying life, at the end of the day, there does tend to be some sacrifice that still needs to happen. And a part of that is understanding that you may have to deal with some hunger periodically throughout the day. Of course, this also differs for people who have serious health conditions like diabetes and people who struggle with eating disorders, as that feeling of hunger can be triggering something else, which is not in my wheelhouse to help with. But for the majority of people, you just need to embrace the suck for a little bit and just let it happen. Number 8 is you need to move more. If you commute to work in a car, a bus, a train, something where you're seated, and then you have an office job where you're seated for most of the day, you then commute back while seated, and then in the evenings you spend a few hours on the couch watching TV, scrolling through social media, you are not going to get a lot of movement in. Even if you're getting a workout in 3 to 5 days a week, and that workout consists of 40 to 60 minutes, that's not taking up a lot of time throughout your day. So start off by walking as much as you possibly can, even if that means parking further out in a parking lot, going for a walk on your lunch period, even getting a walking pad for your desk if you can. You can start your day off with a 10-minute walk, you can finish your day off with a 10-minute walk, and then you can gradually build up from there if time allows. Another easy way to increase movement throughout the day is to alternate sitting and standing throughout the day as well. If you find that you're stuck at your desk for hours each day, take periodic breaks to get up and move around a little bit. If you can, have a standing desk that allows you to raise it and stand for a period of the day and lower it. Your body will not only feel better by getting more movement in, but you'll also be burning more calories throughout the day through non-exercise activity thermogenesis. Basically meaning the more you move, the more your body burns, therefore essentially increasing your metabolism. This will allow you to still have a significant caloric deficit without having to slash calories to really, really low amounts. The problem happens if you have a very sedentary lifestyle, then we can only really push the calorie deficit from the calories that are coming in. And that means that you probably will have to diet harder in order to see results, as opposed to someone who is relatively active and moves a lot throughout the day. Number 8, set realistic expectations. If you go into a diet thinking that you're going to lose 3 to 5 pounds a week, then maybe you're setting yourself up to fail. Maybe not. Typically, on average, the person who has a higher body fat percentage will have an easier time losing large amounts of body weight per week and overall across time. If you're already a fairly lean individual, you're probably not going to see significant changes to your weight across a weekly basis. You could be getting as low as a quarter of a pound of a loss per week on average. It doesn't mean that things aren't still working. It just means that in order to preserve muscle mass, you don't want to diet as hard and you don't want to risk losing muscle. So you're not going to see those really big jumps in weight the way that someone who perhaps is at a higher body fat percentage would. The more weight you lose, the harder it becomes. So this is especially true for people who start off at a higher body fat percentage and they got used to seeing a certain amount lost per week. Then once they get down to lower body fat percentages, that does start to slow down and drop. And they may think, this isn't working, this is as lean as I can get, this is as good as it's going to get, and frankly, that's usually not the case. The last tip, and maybe one of the most important ones, is to be honest with yourself. And if you have a coach, be honest with them as well. If you're going out to eat frequently, if you're not sleeping very much per night, if you're not getting enough protein or fiber throughout the day, if you aren't logging your foods, or if you are logging them, you're only logging the things that look good, then you really can't be upset if progress isn't happening the way that you were hoping it would. You will not get maximal progress with 30% effort. And that isn't even to say that you need to have 100% effort to see progress. But typically you do have to be within that 80% range to be able to not only make progress, but also still be able to enjoy your life as well. Ultimately, we're not robots, so on paper, we can say to do a lot of things that may not be realistic. Some people have busy jobs. Maybe you have a long commute. You have family time that's really important to you. All of those things can impact the plan that is set and put together. So if you are someone who works 40, 50, 60 hours a week, who has a long commute, who has kids at home, who has life events that they're planning for and preparing for, don't expect the results of someone who works from home, who doesn't have kids, and who perhaps even lives alone. The fact is, when it comes to setting plans and setting goals, you have to set one that makes sense for your lifestyle and not just looking at what other people have done and saying, well, I want that. Because if you don't have that same set of life circumstances, again, you're already setting yourself up to be disappointed before you even begin. Ultimately, fat loss isn't complicated when we really look at it, but it's managing these different things and putting a plan together that makes sense for you. The challenging thing ends up being just life. It comes down to social situations and learning to navigate previous behaviors that we've learned and we've grown accustomed to. It's reprogramming the way that we view food and the way that we view even our bodies. And that's not something that happens overnight, but it can happen, and it can happen if you are consistent and diligent and have the discipline to be able to say no to certain things and to maybe make the hard choices. Anyway, that's it for this video. Please like and subscribe and let me know in the comments what you want to see next. Bye.